Hi, welcome to our conversation with David Bjorlin. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Peoria, and Potawatomi peoples. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all original peoples of this region. And we lament the broken promises made to them and their systemic marginalization, and we thank them for their generous hospitality by holding space for them at this gathering. So, let me tell you a little bit about yourself, Dave. No, let me tell everyone out there about David Bjorlin. Born in Duluth, Minnesota, grew up in neighboring Hermantown until graduating from high school. After completing a one-year certificate at a Bible school outside of Quito, Ecuador, he attended North Park University in Chicago, where he graduated with a BA in History and Secondary Education. He went on to complete a Master of Divinity at North Park Theological University Seminary in 2011 and earned his PhD in History and Hermeneutics, Liturgical Studies at Boston University School of Theology in 2018. David currently is a teaching fellow in music and worship at North Park University and the pastor of worship and creative arts at Resurrection Cove Church in Chicago. His first collection of hymns, Protest of Praise, was released this summer. And he's also written several journal articles on the history and practice of congregational song. When not writing or teaching, David enjoys attending concerts, perusing the Art Institute of Chicago, and reading fiction and poetry.
I can still read, I guess.
Yeah.
That's the good part right now.
So many things. We'll have a return to those soon, I hope. So can you tell us some about your book? This is so exciting.
Yeah, so Protest of Praise was, I sort of began writing hymns. Maybe this is what seminary does to you. They often talk about how seminary ruins you. And when I went to seminary, I started singing some of the songs we were singing and being like, oh, I like this, but there's this one part that like doesn't sit right, or like I don't agree with at all. It's not where we are as a church theologically. So I would start just like figuring out how to change it a little. And so I started doing that. And then about the same time, I started attending the annual conference of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, which is an organization that's devoted to enlivening congregational song, not just hymns. But it was there where I realized, like, oh, people that write songs are just people. You always think they come from on high somewhere. But I was seeing like, oh, there's Ruth Duck. I know this hymn she wrote, and she'd be sitting there. Or there's Carl Daw. And it was at one of those that it was actually on the way home where I decided I'm going to try to write a hymn. And so I wrote a wedding hymn for friends that were getting married, and that was a start. And so then I just started trying to write a little at a time, and I would send them to some friends for feedback. And a little by little, I started getting like 10 or 20, and then sent them into a publisher, and it was GIA, and they said, we like this. Can we publish something once you get 50? So then it was kind of this challenge to write 50 hymns. So that was kind of the process.
Had you written poetry in the past, or is this like a newer art form for you, or?
I had written some poetry, some bad poetry. But
Do when we're
yeah,
young.
exactly. Yeah. Especially if you're kind of the moody, angsty type that I am. And I think, but poetry, especially now, tends to be more free form, organic, which I liked, but hymnody has a certain structure. And I think it was helpful for me to have that structure to figure out, like, you could have freedom within that structure. And so it gave me enough to say, like, oh, here's a start. I know this tune, so I'll write something to it. And that gave me the form I think I needed to start doing it. So it became kind of a different practice within poetry and writing.
Nice. Well, since it's December and it's 2 weeks until Christmas, tomorrow's 2 weeks till Christmas.
Right.
Don't want to give anyone any added anxiety, but that's all the time you have left. I would love to show everybody one of your hymns, if we could play it for everybody, the Come Now, O God, one of the Advent hymns that you've written. It's on YouTube, and let's show that. Is that going? If not, we can do it later. Okay, it's not working. Don't you love technology? It's great. Anyway, you have several Advent. Oh, it's up.
Oh. Let's try it.
Our love is forsaken. So tell me a little bit about writing that.
So that one, I had always loved this hymn that's in the covenant hymnal. I think it's 769, Hide Not Your Faith. It's one of my party tricks, is knowing hymn numbers. You can tell which kind of parties I go to, the really exciting kinds. But it's a hymn by, Lena Sandell, who is a Swedish hymn writer. And it's to this beautiful Finnish melody. It's kind of, which we just heard, hide not your face, oh my Savior, be near me. And I always thought it would make just a wonderful Advent tune. And so I'd always had that coming, kind of listening to that. And then 3 years ago, actually, I was at a church, and it was the first Sunday in Advent. And it's that wonderful Isaiah passage, I think 64, that it says, oh, that you would tear open the heavens and come down. And while it was being read, I just thought about the refrain part that was like, come Emmanuel, and those words kind of stuck. And so then I kind of took that passage and said, I'll take this and say, like, why do we want Christ to come? And so I started developing it, writing it during the sermon, which I'm sure the pastor was like, what is that guy doing? Well, he probably thought I was taking really good notes or something.
He's listening so intently.
And so, and that's how that one came about. And it was just really thinking about all of the places in our world, even when our deepest of hopes are mistaken, or come though we wonder if you can still save us. trying to bring some of those really honest questions we have of where Christ is or is not in the world.
I love the Advent begins in darkness one too, and I think that's especially a good one for this particular Advent season when not only is it dark out here in Chicago, but just the ongoing pandemic and just feels a little darker than usual.
Yeah, I've always been, I love Advent because of that. I think it's one of these seasons that is comfortable in the darkness. And so I've always been drawn to that because it seems honest, both naming what is already here, that we're in darkness, but it's also that hope of the light. And yeah, it feels especially appropriate this year, I think. Advent begins in darkness, which is a line from, who is that a line from? Fleming Rutledge, a famous Fleming Rutledge sermon that she said, Advent begins in the dark. And so that was me trying to say, yeah, this is where we are right now. And to me, too many of our worship songs often talk about where we want to be. Like, I give you everything, I surrender all, which is aspirational, right?
Right.
But I think
it's good to
sometimes
say those things, speak them into existence, right? Yeah.
But if we only sing aspirationally and never sing about where we are, I think sometimes then we get into this kind of, evangelicals may know this well, where you kind of put on a face for church as opposed to saying, oh, this is where we are right now.
And the songbook in the Bible is full of this kind of complaining and, lament and all of that. And yeah, so I love that your songs kind of echo the Psalms in that way. Your newest Advent song is not in your book, but I saw it on your Facebook page, and I really loved the words. Can you tell us some of that? Maybe a little bit of that one.
Sure, I'll read a little bit of it, and that might get so. This one looked at the 3 Old Testament lessons for the first 3 weeks in Advent this year, which is that same one, oh, that you would come, tear open the heavens and come down. And then there's that beautiful Isaiah 40, comfort, comfort my people. And then this coming week is the passage where the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim a release to the captives, sight to the blind. And then, they will be called oaks of righteousness and builders of the ruins. So I thought about that idea of ruins. And so each of the stanzas is kind of one of those passages. So it says, in ruins where we sit and weep, surrounded by despair, our hopes have grown too small to trust, our griefs too big to bear. O God, come save us from ourselves and do not hide your face. Though all our deeds are filthy rags, come clothe us in your grace. Speak comfort to our wreckage, God, and healing to our pain. Make cracked foundations whole again and jagged places plain. Tear down the rubble of our sin, let holes of hate be filled. Prepare our world for something new that only you can build. From ruins, God, rebuild a house where all may come in peace, where broken spirits are restored and prisoners find release, where mourners trade their tears for joy and boundaries are erased, as your eternal reign will rise from all we thought was waste.
Beautiful. I was looking over it and reading it kind of, I don't know, you had said, oh, put it to a tune or use it if you want, and the Oh Sacred Head Now Wounded tune came to mind for that song, and then I realized that that's the one you have for In Wilderness We Wander. Is that
Mm-hmm.
What is it called? Passion Chorale tune?
Yep.
Yeah. Kind of, I think of that as like an Easter tune, which I don't know why, because it's kind of, I don't know. So I thought the text kind of sounded nice to that tune as well. So I noticed that one song was a Swedish writer with a Finnish tune, and your last name sounds to me a little Scandinavian.
Yeah, the J is the giveaway, right?
I
Yeah,
so.
The Bjorlin. Yeah, so I'm half Scandinavian, half Nordic, I should say.
But you didn't grow up in the Swedish Covenant Church, then?
No, my grandparents did, and my dad did, but my dad is actually a Pentecostal pastor. So so I grew up in a break off of the Assemblies of God called the Fellowship of Christian Assemblies in Duluth.
It's very cool. What do you think your Pentecostal upbringing brings to this project, if anything?
No, it's for sure. I mean, there's a couple things. I'm no longer Pentecostal, so there's always this I think in many people's faith walks, right, there's these kind of reactionary moments where you're like, I'm not that anymore. And then you get to a point where you can say like, oh yes, I am. All of this is a part of me. And I think for my Pentecostalism, first, I got a deep training in the Bible. So many times we had to memorize a bunch of verses and, do all of that. And at the time you kind of begrudge that and you're like, why are we doing this? And, sometimes I don't like the way that the Bible can be used in certain evangelical, especially white evangelical traditions. But I so appreciate that these gifts that they're gifts that have been given to me, that, when I'm feeling a certain way, I have this kind of depository of the tradition, biblical tradition in me. And so I hope that comes out in my writing, the kind of biblical allusions that are there, because they're just a part of me. And I think another thing is the sense of, oh no, are we okay? I think another part is the sense of flow in a song, or the idea of the song needs some life or spirit in it, whether that comes to the lyrics. That doesn't mean I like write tongues, but it does mean that there's a sense of, okay, how are we telling this story, in a tradition that loves the word. I think that's a part of it too. So I do think that plays a role, even though, we don't think hymnody when we think Pentecostalism usually anymore.
No, I don't. Yeah. So, and then how did you get from your Pentecostal upbringing to your Ecuador Bible school? What brought you there?
So I went to my junior year. I didn't really enjoy the Bible camp I went to. And so I told my parents, and they were like, that's okay, but you should go to a camp. And I always joke it's because they wanted to get me out of the house at least 1 week during the summer, which I respect. And so two of my kind of acquaintances from high school went there at the time to a different camp, Covenant Park Bible Camp, which is just south of Duluth. And I went, and I loved the experience. It was, took faith seriously without being quite as intense as my previous camp. And actually the speaker, between my junior and senior year, his name was Todd Slechta. And he was
He's great.
and who's now in Covenant leadership. But he was the speaker. And I went and talked to him, and he said, if you have these questions, I'm the executive director of this Bible camp in Ecuador. And so, I couldn't spend the night at anyone's house until I was a sophomore. My mom thought I would never leave the house. And then when we got in the car, me and my two friends, all three of us said, we're going to Ecuador, next year. And one of the moms said, no, you're not. And all three of us ended up going to Ecuador. And that was kind of the start of that journey into the covenant.
And then on to North Park.
Yeah.
And now you're teaching a course at the seminary, right?
Yeah, I teach full time at the seminary. So I teach the Foundations of Christian Worship class.
Oh, yeah.
Worship arts. And then I also teach at the School of Music. I teach this spring, I'll be teaching Introduction to Theology through Congregational Song. So anything worship music related, but not the actual playing of music, but the history and the theology of it. That's kind of my wheelhouse.
Do you write any tunes for your hymns, or are
Yeah,
you?
I've written two, but what I really do is I have a melody, and then I send it to one of my friends, Ben, who I've written a few things with. And I said, Ben, I'll send him a recording and say, this is what I'm thinking. And then he'll do kind of the arrangement, because I don't have the kind of technical skills that he does. So
That's great. Yeah, there's a couple of videos of you singing your own songs at the piano.
Yeah.
On YouTube.
Occasionally.
They're very nice. So you mentioned when you were talking about your Pentecostal upbringing, just the connection to the word, and just the power of words. Is that kind of where this protest of praise title comes from, or where does that? Why did you
Choose
title
that?
it that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. So the first hymn I wrote was that Advent begin. Well, one of the first, probably in the first 10, was Advent begins in the darkness of night, and and one of the lines is, and in the midst of life's centerless maze, we lift together our protest of praise. And so as I was thinking about titles, it's been an interesting thing, as I think I say this in the introduction, to be writing during this particular administration, and feel like what Christians need now is to learn how to protest injustice, especially in the evangelical tradition, I think. And so there's a couple reasons. You talked about words. I think one of the things I'm very passionate about, and Tiana, other people who at Chapuza who've taken my class know this, the power of words. I always quote Abraham Joshua Heschel, who says, words create worlds. And I think it was Kathleen Norris who once said, it's ironic that in a tradition, in the Protestant tradition, which says like the word alone, we are often so cavalier with the words we use, whether that's in the songs we sing or in the sermons preached. And so I think one of the reasons I came to hymnody was to say, like, I want us to pay more attention to our words, and I want to pay more attention to the words. And so when I was thinking about that, Protest of Praise seemed like the right title, both because I think on the one hand, protest, right? It seems like a season of protest, but also I think praise always is a protest. To praise God is always to protest the things that shouldn't be. To say we are people of God's kingdom is to say there are certain things that are not of that kingdom that we need to be against. But to say praise to me is also to say, like, but we need to be more than just against things. The reason we're Christians is because we believe there's a vision of the world that's better, and we're given a vision of that, where swords are beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. I think we need to create with our words, help people create broader imaginations of how the world can be. I think it was Ursula Le Guin. I love fantasy and some sci-fi. And in one of her speeches, she said, she often got critiqued, or people get critiqued because their ideas aren't realistic. And she said, we need to be realists of a larger reality. Which to me says, okay, we say it's not realistic to change the energy, how we use energy or consume things. But in that larger reality, we have to, because we're using, we're using exhaustible resources.
Right.
And so she's saying we need to look for these bigger realities. And so I think that's one of the reasons I write, is that hope to help develop in my own, I'm always writing from a place of where I want to be, not where I am often. And so trying to develop that imagination in myself and help other people do that too.
Yeah. I think there's this this freedom in the songs that you write for people to kind of question and like think about what they believe. And I think that's not something I've seen a lot in congregational songs. And I just really love that. One of my favorite ones that you wrote is this, "Oh Spirit, send doubt."
Yeah, so that one, I'm just flipping it to it in my copy, so I actually know what I'm talking about. But I remember this one specifically because it came from, I was reading, what was I reading? Oh, Barbara Brown Taylor, and BBT. And she said, and this line stuck out to me. She said, "Doubt often brings me to poke at what I believe. And when it topples, I realize it was an idol. And so doubt has been a divine gift that has led me deeper into God." And so I often think doubt gets such a bad name because it's seen as the thing that leads us away from faith. But to me, if we're using doubt right, it should help us actually drive closer, help topple those idols to draw closer to the living God who is beyond our control. And so to me, doubt can be a really positive thing. It doesn't always have to be a negative thing. It can be uncomfortable sometimes, for sure. But I think doubt can also lead us further into truth and asking the right questions, which seems to be something we're not always good at either.
Yes, I mean, I love, there's so many lines in this song that I love, but the "Oh Spirit, send doubt when our faith turns to pride and builds bigger walls to keep others outside." It's just this, I really, it's one of my, there's so many really great texts in here, but that was a highlight in reading. And also the "ask the complicated questions." That's a wordy title.
Yeah, and I kind of did it. That's one of those where the form kind of fits, where you're talking about complicated, and I kind of wanted to use kind of complicated words. So like, seek the disconcerting, another long word. But that's another one where I was thinking about that Christ's commandment to ask and seek and knock. And like, well, what are we asking? What are we seeking after? What are we knocking on? And it seems like, I'll read the last stanza because this is kind of how it wraps up.
Can you sing it for us?
Yeah. So it's to this Southern Harmony tune called Restoration. So it goes, "For in struggle we discover truth both simple and profound. In the knocking, asking, seeking, we are opened, answered, found."
I love that tune. I know hymns to that tune.
Oh yeah. "I will rise and go to Jesus." That's a great thing about using familiar tunes too, because they'll kind of have this other text in your mind, and then you start making connections,
Love that. I just wanted to go back to something you said a little bit ago about loving fantasy writer, or I don't know how you were talking about Ursula Le Guin.
Yeah.
And in the text, "Remember God Your Promises," when you were talking about how you wrote that, you mentioned Madeleine L'engle, who's one of my favorites. I want to look at that. So what I need to look at what the connection was there, because I wrote that down because I was like, oh right, that when she says to her grandson, or that her grandson said, "Oh God, remember to be the Lord."
Yeah, isn't that such a beautiful?
Oh.
And Madeleine L'engle is another one who, those are the people I'm really inspired by, the George MacDonald's, C.S. Lewis's, Madeleine L'engle, Octavia Butler's, the people that are stretching our imaginations. But this one specifically, it started with the line, "Oh God, remember to be God." But then it just got a little weird to sing that way. So it switched to "Remember God Your Promises." But yeah, Madeleine L'engle is another person who I think has given us a beautiful tradition of imagining. and asking these, telling God, remember to be God, which is something that the Psalter is always crying out, the prophets are crying out. So to me, it seems a very faithful way in which to engage that we often don't.
Yeah, and just that power of story that doesn't have to be like, oh, here's the truth, here's the thing that you should be getting, but just these beautiful stories that kind of awaken our imagination and kind of like these underpinnings of these big truths.
Yeah, it's like Garrison Keillor talks about, there's no answers, just stories. And to me, that gets at a truth of often we want things in kind of bullet points for this is how this will go, 7 steps for highly effective, whatever, fill in the blank. But so much of how we live is much messier than that. And it's much more storied where, it might have a plot, but the plot gets, very messy, and things that seem to be going like this all of a sudden turn backwards, or, something comes in and totally knocks us off where we thought we were going. And to me, seeing faith as a story allows for that in a way that propositions don't.
Well, in the Bible, the Bible is filled with stories that are just bizarre, and you think like, oh, this is where it's going. It's like, whoa, no, he killed that guy's husband. I mean, he killed that woman's husband, and yeah. So I think it's funny that we've become a people of such rigidity, but our sacred text is filled with really complex stories.
Absolutely.
About real people.
Right.
That are messy.
Right. And which is our only hope, because God works through them. So it's like, well, then if God can, if God can work through Noah being drunk in his tent, or, if Abraham trying to like pawn off his wife in Egypt, like all these stories are just so many, and those are like the tamest of some, then there's hope for all of us. And maybe we don't have to focus so much on purity that we lose our storied humanity.
Well, that's what I love about what you're doing. It's like the words are sort of this deconstruction of some of this more rigid ideas or theology. But then you have it couched in this really traditional tunes and this format. So it's just cool. The juxtaposition is really, I don't know, it just awakens something, right? Because like you're saying, like this familiar song, but now it's got these new words.
Yeah, I think what's helpful about that is I do think there's this tension in faith that, like, once you get a little bit of deconstruction, that can kind of like, it kind of is freeing, but it also can be like this thing where all of a sudden it's like, I'm tearing down everything. And sometimes you do need to, I think I like to say that deconstruction is a great tool. It's not necessarily where I want to live, because then you're living in ruins. And I think God finds us in the ruins, but I also think that juxtaposition also gets at, like, there's parts of these traditions that we do need to deconstruct for sure. But also the only reason we have our faith is because it's been handed down imperfectly through imperfect people to us. And so kind of that using the kind of more traditional forms to say new things seems to me to be hopefully a healthy synthesis of those two things.
Yeah, and you were saying that, like, for evangelicals to be so like, oh, the word, but then kind of careless with words. It's interesting because I see a lot of young people returning to higher church traditions. Do you see that as well, or?
Yeah, I see it both ways. I do think there's a lot of people who have found that for whatever reason, some of the evangelical either worship patterns or theology don't fit. And I think what they find is that they have all this kind of fervor and love and spirit, or whatever you want to call that. And they don't necessarily have anywhere to put it sometimes. And sometimes I think of these traditions that tend to be more formal liturgically as kind of forms in which they can kind of pour all that fervor and energy and give it some shape. And the opposite is true too. You know, sometimes people who grew up really in those really formal liturgical spaces have all the right words, but don't seem to engage the spirit of it. And they find going to, you know, more evangelical or charismatic traditions, they find that blend. And to me, instead of seeing that as like a, you know, the old traditional versus contemporary, or to find it like, oh, what gifts we've been given and how do we use these gifts well? And so for a lot of evangelicals, I think it's finding like, oh, I don't need to reinvent everything. We've been given a lot of gifts that many of us are only now uncovering, that, you know, Orthodox traditions, Roman Catholic, Episcopalians, they're like, yes, these are here. And what a gift they are to us. And so I think a lot of people resonate with that and resonate with the care of language and the rejection of easy answers, which I think sometimes when there's more of an emphasis on mystery, like there is in some of those traditions, I think it gives space for people who might not know what they believe yet. It's hard to be a doubter for a long time in an evangelical context. It's okay if you doubt for a while and then get to the right place. But sometimes it's hard if you are a person who, you know, doesn't know, and it can feel like you're on the margins often.
But your songs really embrace that questioning, kind of wandering spirit, but also rooted. So it's such a great combination of ideas.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is that trying to say, like, there is always both the need to explore and the need to be grounded. One of the best metaphors from Ben Stewart, who's a liturgical scholar here in Chicago, Lutheran, he talks about it as like a geometric compass, you know, not like a where's north, but like that you used to use in math class. Yes, and he said it's when we're rooted in a tradition that we can draw those larger circles, you know, that we can kind of wander a little bit and explore because we're rooted in something deeper. And when we try to do one without the other is where we often tend to, you know, go to the extremes.
Absolutely. So who are some of the hymn writers? Someone asked a question. I got a little piece of paper here.
Yeah.
If you know Eric Routley?
Yeah, I do know. I mean, I don't know him because he died a long time ago, but.
So your thoughts on him regarding these same topics?
Yeah, well, Eric Routley is kind of the father of American hymnody, at least, which is funny because he's from England. But he was the first person. He was like the most genial man in the world. So if you listen to tapes of him, he's just brilliant and he could play everything and he wrote a bunch of tunes. But he really paved the way for most of hymnology as it's now studied in the US. And he was one of the first to start thinking like, oh, there's this whole global movement that we really don't understand when we only focus on Western hymnody. He never saw that out to, I think, where he would have gone maybe. But, you know, if you look, about a dozen of these books are Eric Routley back here. So, you know, he's kind of the foundation for a lot of things.
So it kind of sounds like he was like a Mr. Rogers kind of guy, which I'm not. When you said genial and like, anyway, it just made me think of that kind of character. Not necessarily
and very funny too.
Know, puppets or whatever, but yes. Who are some other hymn writers or modern hymn writers that you like? Or
oh yeah, there are, and this is one of the things I always try to emphasize in class: how many people are writing hymns right now, and how many resources there are. Some of my personal favorites, kind of in the more traditional hymnody. Adam Tice, who's a Mennonite hymn writer, is brilliant. He's also my editor, so maybe that sounds like but I actually, before he was my editor, I would send him my texts because he's such a craftsman. And we explore a lot of the same themes. A new hymn writer that's up and coming is Chris Shelton, who's a pastor in Presbyterian pastor in New York City, who's releasing his first book next summer. And then there's people like Mary Louise Bringle, Mel Bringle, who has written beautiful texts for, one of her most famous is When Memory Fades, which is about Alzheimer's and people caring for people with Alzheimer's. Ruth Duck, Carl Daw, there's a lot. And then there's people like Mark Miller, who's a Methodist, who's kind of does more gospel infused things, who I'm collaborating with right now. So there's and then the people that write tunes. And so for me, it's people that I've gone to, like Mark Miller, but also Sui Hong Lim, who teaches up in Toronto, Ben Brody, who I wrote Advent Begins, and I've written the most with Ben.
On that video and in many of your YouTube videos, right?
Yes. Yeah, he teaches at Whitworth. And I feel like I'm missing, who else am I missing? Oh, Sally Ann Morris, who are the people that I'm really drawn to. I think I think some of the best, most creative work is happening right now in congregational song, which is really exciting. Some of those barriers that used to separate things are coming down, and then it gets to people like Porter's Gate and Urban Doxology, and people who are, those people in contemporary styles who are starting to say, but we need to be talking about justice, and doing it in such beautiful and thoughtful ways that I'm really excited about and would love to work with.
And what about with like liturgy? Are you reading any of the? I had a book recently called Every Moment Holy, which I can't remember the author right now, but I'm really loving that. Have you seen any of these newer?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the cool things about things like Instagram, where people are starting, like we just interviewed Terry Stokes, who has at our church, who has a Instagram handle called Prayers from Terry. And he writes in the traditional, Black Episcopalian, writes in the very traditional collect form, which is very like, it's you who do that through, like there's a very specific form, but he writes about wonderful things like, a prayer for FOMO when you're fear of missing out, or prayer before walking into Target. But it gets to that kind of every moment holy thing, that God is present, not just in these kind of churchy moments, but what we buy at Target is part of our spirituality, just as much as, what we're doing on Sunday mornings between 10:30 and 12.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully, right?
Right, exactly. That's the goal. And not always the case for all of us, I realize, but.
Right, but God is always
Yes.
wherever we are. So yeah, not inviting his presence, but really being present to the presence, right?
Right. That's like that, some people don't like their traditional invocations where it's, come Jesus, because, and I think that was I can't remember what, yeah. And it's one of the, I like that. One of the worship songs, I'm forgetting which one it is now, but that sings, let us become more aware of your presence.
Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And that's more of it. That's more of the call, right? To say, God is already at work always.
Right. Yeah.
The Jesuits say, find God in all things.
Yeah, right. So I have a question from our audience out there. When did you first fall in love with hymns? Do you remember the moment?
I don't think it was it's funny because I don't think it was a moment. One of the things I often think about is when I was little and we'd be sitting through some long, arduous sermon, there was always a hymnal there. I'm trying to see if I still have the hymnal, because I have it, but well, anyway, it was Hymns of Glorious Praise, which was the Assemblies of God hymnal. And I used to just look through when I was bored. And so I started doing things like, let's see how many hymns Fanny J. Crosby wrote. And I would just go through, not, but I think for me, it was really in seminary when the melding of like the theology with the music came. And then especially when I remember the first time I went to the Hymn Society conference, and they do a hymn festival every night. And I remember the first night, it was Carl Daw and Dolores Duffner leading. And the first song, you're in a room full of people who love singing. And so all of a sudden the singing just like, I couldn't sing the first stanza because it was like, I was too choked up because it was such a beautiful, and that was the moment where I was like, these are my people. And this is what I want to do.
Have you ever done any Sacred Harp?
I have not. I've always been fascinated. I have friends who,
Sung.
oh yeah. How was that experience?
I did it. I was like, wow, this is kind of strange sounding, but
Yeah.
also really wonderful. And I've gone to a couple hymn sings, actually here in the same building where I'm sitting in the Wilson Abbey. And the words are so powerful. But the first time you sing it through, it's just these weird syllables,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so there's something really, I don't know, kind of otherworldly about it.
Well, and there's something so like the tone is just so instinctual and like raw.
It's kind of guttural. Yes, yeah, raw. I'm disappeared. Oh, I'm back.
You're back.
Sorry.
No. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, I think you would enjoy it. When we all can sing together again, I encourage you to find one. There's lots of Sacred Harp singings going on in the Chicagoland area. So I have a little present for you. I'm trying to see if I can, I don't know if I can do this. Let me try. Music, right? Is this what I do, Nate? And then share. And then, sorry.
No.
Oh, no, that's bad. I'm not going to do that. I'll just tell you about it and send it to you because.
Play it at the end.
And Nate can play a little clip of it at the end, but you and I won't be able to hear it. But when I saw those lyrics for your new Advent hymn on your Facebook page, I sent them to my friend Glenn Kaiser, and he wrote a little tune and sent it to me. He was recently had COVID, but his voice. He was like, oh, I tried to wait till my voice was strong enough, but it sounds really great. And I
love it.
Anyway,
Glenn's also in the Covenant hymnal.
He is, yeah. So anyway, I wanted to play a little clip for everybody, but Nate will play it, but you won't be able to hear it. But
I'll hear it.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
so,
perfect.
Let's see. Okay, so if people want to get this book, where do they do that, or how do they?
There's a couple places they can get it. So giamusic.com. GIA is my publisher. Then you can go to their website and click in it. There's also a link. I have a website, davidbjorlin.com. That's one of the nice things about having a name like David Bjorlin. You always get the Gmail account. There's no worries. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you can go there as well. And then there's if you go to like whatever the link is, shop, or it'll send you there too. But that's through GIA is the way to do it.
Right. And are these all the hymns that you've written? Have you been published before, or?
So I have one other. So I have about 12 I've written since then, 11. and then 11 or 12. And then I actually have one that I wrote before that was published with Hope Publishing. That's a When Our World is Rent by Violence, which is actually in the new Lutheran supplemental hymnal that just came out.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And the 12 that you've written since, are you planning another book?
Yeah. So once again, so there's a couple. GIA has also started this thing called Unbound, which puts it in this kind of like the form you see here with like it puts it in this online and then allows you to buy a PDF for $2 or whatever. And so instead of waiting till you have all 50, you can do it one by one. And then once I get to 50 again, I'll have a nice, yes, exactly. Get it bound and
yeah. Because GIA, I'm not familiar, but it's a music.
Yeah, so GIA started as a Catholic publishing. It used to stand for Gregorian Institute of America, so you can see that. But then they changed it to GIA. But they do so they do all of the like gather worship Catholic hymnals, but they also like all the Taizé in the United States music is through GIA. All John Bell Iona music is through GIA. So they do a kind of this very wide range of music. They're one of the biggest Christian congregational song publishers in the U.S.
It's wonderful. Do you have any final thoughts for us tonight? This has been really great. I'd love to hear more about your songs, and I encourage everybody to get a copy. It's I think it works great for a devotional, even if you don't sing. It's just beautiful words and really, just a good tool for getting closer to God and just being welcome to be a doubter. I love that.
No, I think all I would say, I first thank you so much for inviting me to talk. It's been wonderful. I have many friends at Chapuza and friends and former students. I think what I'm always saying, I think I will be this broken record till I die, is let's take the words we sing seriously, because they form the kind of Christians we're going to become. And so whatever position you're in, to really think about those words and think about how we can sing what we believe and believe what we sing.
Love that. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you.
And maybe Nate will play a little clip for our audience. We're off? Oh, we're done.
Did it. I know. It's wild. Like you look and it's like 7:12 and you're like,
surrounded by despair, our hopes have grown too small to trust, our griefs too big to bear. Oh God, come save us from ourselves, and do not hide your face. Though all our deeds are filthy rags, come clothe us in your grace. Speak comfort to our wreckage, God, and healing to our pain. Make cracked foundations whole again, and jagged places plain. Tear down the rubble of our sin, let holes of hate be filled. Prepare our world for something new that only you can build. From ruins, God, rebuild broken spirits are restored, and prisoners find release, where mourners trade their tears for joy, and boundaries are erased, as your eternal reign will rise from all we thought was waste.